What is your area of expertise? Sorry.
I'm actually pretty eclectic. I've been an elected official. I teach eco-poetics at the Naropa University for the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. I've been I served as a mayor for 8 years. I work a lot in Africa, mostly in very harsh situations, in refugee camps, in hunger camps in Ethiopia, wherever there isn't water. I wish sometimes that I had rain dancers with me. And I work a lot with wildlife, especially in the United States. Right now I'm trying to create a safe passage corridor for jaguars to return to the United States. I work with anybody or any organization that feels it wants to care for the earth. So I've worked with multinationals that were doing environmental work, and I've worked with the poorest of poor towns that were trying to do environmental justice work, and I've worked a lot in Indian reservations in the Southwest with Apache friends and Tohono O'odham friends. So I'm also was the editor of the Whole Earth Catalog for environmental issues, and that was a 30-year project. So, but that magazine has now ended, so I'm now kind of more freelance.
What sparked your interest in nature initially in your life?
You know, some people I think are just born that way. It's really hard to say. I remember as a little kid, I was born in El Paso, grew up in Brooklyn, and I remember being in the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens and discovering my first tadpole. And I must have only been 4 years old or something like that. But I was so proud of this tadpole. I thought, well, this is a great tadpole, you know. And then I was told it was going to become a frog, and I just thought that was miraculous. And as I've gone through my life, certain animals have kind of been my teachers or guides. So when I was about 10 or 11, I got into bird watching, and it was a red-winged blackbird. And then when I was in college, I was asked to go to Africa and live with baboons. And baboons became great teachers of mine in Kenya. And then rhesus monkeys in the Caribbean. And then a little squirrel called the Mount Graham red squirrel, which is an endangered squirrel, turned out to be on the top of the mountain of one of the sacred mountains of the Apaches. And a whole group of astronomers wanted to cut the top of the mountain for telescopes. And so that little squirrel led me to the Vatican because the Vatican was putting up a telescope. And I was there with 5 Apache spiritual leaders arguing to save a sacred mountain and to save a little 8-ounce squirrel. So you get to be taught a lot if you commit yourself to a particular animal, kind of like a totem, and take it on as your desire to go anywhere where that creature, be it a jaguar or a squirrel, will take you. And so I don't really say that, I mean, I know that other people don't have as deep a commitment as I do to that, but I've always found that they were my great teachers. And so, of course, I've always gone and found another, or they found me, the squirrel found me. And it's just being open to understanding that you can learn from nature. So,
do you believe that humanity is living in harmony with the planet and its natural systems?
You know, I love music, and so there are many kinds of harmonies, and nature has even more. So, I mean, there's a hip-hop ecosystem, there's a rap ecosystem, there's a classical music ecosystem. You know, we're seeing great operatic ecosystems with hurricanes. I mean, that's the great operas of the earth, and earthquakes, and, you know. So when you say in harmony with nature, I really think about different harmonies and different people. And different people have different harmonies with the earth. And there really hasn't been, until very recently, even until we saw that picture of the planet from outer space, there really hasn't been even an understanding of one earth and one human species. Harmony is a word that comes from an old Indo-European root, which meant to fit together in a pleasing way. And harmony and arm, for instance, are the same word. They come from it. So if you have a dislocated shoulder, it isn't fitting together in a pleasing way. And so harmonies here, to me, is how do we get humans and the earth and people to live and fit together in a pleasing way. And of course, that isn't true right now. I mean, there are lots of wars, there's lots of people starving, there's lots of people in refugee camps. So things aren't fitting together, not just between humans and nature, but between humans and humans. And figuring out how to reconcile ourselves to each other is part of the process of reconciling ourselves to the earth. And so to create peace and security for, let's say, the planet and its ecosystems is to create peace and security for humans. So I don't really distinguish between human nature as part of nature. They're both natures. We just have a peculiar kind of nature inside of it. And one of the great things about our nature actually is that we can create music and harmonies. So at this point, no, of course we don't all fit together in a pleasing way, and the shoulder's dislocated, the hip is dislocated, the knee is dislocated, the ankle is dislocated, but that's part of understanding the need to take it personally, as well as the need to see the bigger heart of taking the whole planet into consideration.
When you speak about humans and having harmony with each other, how would you describe who we are? I mean, being part of nature, but a little bit different. How would you describe us?
I learned how to sit quietly by sitting with baboons on the savannas of Africa. And I think I learned kind of that what human beings are actually kind of anxious as a species. They don't have as many quiet moments. And they just somehow are always looking around. They're always like worrying about what's going on next. In that way, they're more like chimpanzees. And so I learned that one of the things that humans have to do is decide, am I okay? Do I have enough? And is this enough going to make me content? And that's one of the things that the species has to teach itself in a way, because it hasn't yet. And so it's always grasping. It always wants more, more products, more cool stuff, more land, wants conquest, And that deep part of just who the human species is, this kind of inner anxiety or something like that, that's what we have to work on. And I think working on that also will make it easier for us just to stop and say, hey, it's cool, I'm alive, it's really a beautiful life. Look, there's a blue sky, there's great clouds, that's enough. I don't need that much more. Of course you need food and shelter and everything. But what's happened is the advertising world, especially, has played on that anxiety. So, and they've created a kind of black magic about buying stuff. So instead of saying, is the soap good for you? What you do is you see a woman's thigh with water coming down it and she's rubbing her thigh. And so they're making some kind of connection between soap and sex. Well, that isn't what you want to know about soap. What you want to know about soap is it filled with synthetic molecules that might give you cancer 20 years from now, or will it clean your body in a way to get rid of germs? And but so there's kind of a black magic of the modern commercial world that's taken us away 2 steps from. First, you now start thinking, oh God, if I don't use this soap, maybe I won't be attractive. Oh gosh, if I don't use this soap, I better get more soap to make myself really clean, and it gets into this weirdness. And that has to do with playing on human anxiety, rather than saying, oh, I'm a cool person. If I wash today, great. I've lived in so many places where I couldn't wash that if I got upset about soap, I would really have gone crazy while being out in the middle of Africa or some other place. So I think at the heart of all that, the human species has to kind of cool it on its on that kind of inner anxiety, I think that if you look at bonobos, which are a kind of pygmy chimpanzee, they're really special. They are completely different. And in fact, they've been kind of suppressed by the media in the United States because they solve everything through sex. If there's any fight that's about to erupt, they just have sex instead. The men have sex with men, the women with women, the men with women, and there's actually hardly ever a fight in this whole group of bonobos. And of course, it's weird on television. You can show two animals murdering each other and eating each other, but you can't show bonobos kind of figuring out another way to do it. So we're somewhere between chimpanzees and bonobos, you know, and we haven't quite figured out where we are as a species. And what the bonobos have to teach is that probably the only reason to meaningful purpose of being on the planet is to reduce pain and suffering, and to do it in a way that isn't cruel. And so the bonobos are those kind of teachers, while the baboons are teaching about anxiousness and equanimity and quiet. And so those are my teachers, and I would say that that's, for me, what has to happen is humans have to learn how to reduce pain and suffering without doing it through war. You know, like we're out here going to make you into democracy by war. You know, I mean, that's not the way of reducing pain and suffering, as we've recently seen.
So going a little bit on the bonobos, and is there a cure? Have you thought at all about what the cure is and how we could actually deal with this anxiousness that we describe?
Well, I think there are three things. I mean, I think that the big failure actually recently has been the failure of organized religion to understand its connection to the earth. I mean, I'm saying that very bluntly, perhaps the Dalai Lama is an exception to that. But in general, people want to have some guidance in their spiritual life. And America has turned spirituality almost into a commodity. It's like selling beer. You know, you do this, you'll be part of you get spiritual health or something like that. So the way I see it at this point, you know, and everybody's path is different. So is that the first part about the anxiety is to be kind to oneself. I mean, you're never going to feel that you're okay unless you're kind to yourself. But the environmental part of being kind to oneself is to really look at what you take into your body. So when you cook with Teflon, you're getting a synthetic chemical in your body. When you open a can, the inner lining that made it preservative contains a synthetic chemical that has been implicated in all kinds of disease. When you even are a hiker out there with a Nalgene water bottle, Nalgene leaches into that water, especially if it's hot out there, like in the deserts where I work. So the first thing to be kind to yourself environmentally is to be very aware and very disciplined about what you eat, what you take in, and what you buy. So when you go out, you know, you're buying yourself a new piece of furniture, you can look for IKEA furniture, which we know has fabrics that don't have stain resistors or that are chemically outgas and can cause you eventual harm. And it's a kind of act of faith a little bit because the actual proof isn't exact right now. It's like where we were with malaria in the 1800s. Malaria comes from the words mal air, meaning bad air, and everyone knew that you got malaria from the swamps. But they didn't know that it was because of a mosquito and a parasite. They just knew stay away from swamps. Well, we're kind of like there with chemistry right now. We know that there are chemicals that mimic estrogens and especially screw around with women's and fetal metabolism. But so to be kind to yourself environmentally means to do that. It means to really look at what you're taking into your body so that you keep your health physically, primarily, and that's huge. If you can discipline yourself in a way and be a master at that, you are then changing the whole marketplace, because then you're refusing to buy products that might harm you, and you're also telling other people how to live a life that's environmentally friendly. So by doing that, you know, when I was a kid, everyone thought tofu was a cheese. It was some cheese from China, you know, no one knew what tofu was at all. And, you know, now it's in Safeway. Now it's in the major marketplaces. The same thing with organic milk has just come into the major mainstream. So that was because people were self-disciplined. And so the first act, I think, of getting rid of anxiety is to be kind to oneself. And say also, you know, what is it I really am comfortable with. What do I have to take from the environment? What do I have to give back because I'm taking something? When do I have enough? And really sit down. I mean, many people in Western culture are now addicted to consumerism. They got to get the latest, the newest, the most. And that is not a self-discipline. That's an indulgence. It's arrogant towards the earth because it just keeps on taking from the earth and never gives back. So I'd say that was my first step, is to be kind to yourself. The second one is the old one, which is to love thy neighbor. The abode of the heart is how we would call it. And a big question right now, and this is where we're not getting much leadership, is how to extend the heart out beyond the immediate human neighborhood, and to see what your watershed is about, your region is about, your whole continent is about, and now actually the globe is about, and to extend the heart that big. So that's another kind of learning and there my teachers actually have been whales, because the gray whale, I used to live in California, the gray whale came all the way from Alaska all the way down to the Vizcaíno of Mexico, where it had its nursery. And so as soon as you got interested and began to just love whales, you had to think almost globally. And so you understood that globalization has been here forever. I mean, swallows go from, the terns go from the Arctic down to South America. Monarch butterflies go from Canada down into Mexico. Cranes go from the middle of Africa through Israel all the way up into the Eurasia. I mean, globalization is something nature has understood how to live with and how to adjust itself to either the seasons of the globe, so that you move south, you move north, and so that's another way of extending the heart out. And again, in that, you have to decide what you love. So some people may love water and want to look at what's happening with water on the planet. Others may love earth, the soil, and see what's happening with farming and suburbanization and the loss of erosion. Others may like energy and be very concerned with global warming and what happens. And so the first act of extending the heart is to first decide what you love. I mean, then you go ahead and you find out all the information you need to know and what you know, and then you look at the world in its horrible state right now, and you say, this is what I'll accept. And some people, like Julia Butterfly, for instance, couldn't accept the loss of trees, and so she lived in one for 2 years. Other people decide they're very good diplomatically, and so they try to work in the UN. It doesn't really matter which path you take, as long as you really first love nature, or the part of nature, the sources of life, earth, air, water, energy. And if you love that, then you can get through. You don't even need hope in a funny way. You're committed, and you're going to win some and you're going to lose some. That's the reality. I mean, especially like myself, who works in Africa, a lot of people are going to die. And you have to accept that a lot of people are going to suffer and a lot of people are going to die. And you can't change that. You can help it a little bit. You can reduce the amount. The same thing with species. I mean, we're in a period of cataclysmic loss of species on the planet. And I can't save them all. In 1970, I started working on the Whole Earth Catalog, and I couldn't find more than 5 environmental groups to review for the catalog. In 1994, when we did the last catalog, I had to give up because I was at 4,000. And they were, Friends of the Manatee in Florida, Friends of the Great Horned Lizard in New Mexico. It was every people had found what they loved and committed themselves to it. And so that's the extension of the heart. So we have first be kind to yourself, then the extension of the heart. And the third thing is a little bit more difficult to talk about. There are certain magic things that happen on the earth. I mean, you see a sunset, you run a river, there are certain magical moments. And that kind of ties it all together. You're awestruck, it's non-ordinary. Music does it very much. Music and a good movie does it, you know, a good drama does it. And those take you out of the ordinary daily drudgery of life, you know. And so how to bring that back in when most people live in cities and don't have a contact. I mean, that's why when they extend their heart out, they look how many people extend it to their pets. And that's because the pets are as close as they can get to another living creature because they're in the city or a suburban environment. So that's a difficulty for the world right now that's never been there before. And I have a lot of cowboy friends, and I work a lot in ranches, and they all kind of moan and groan about those urban people all the time, those city slickers, you know, because every day really is Earth Day for them. I mean, we may not like what they do all the time, or overgrazing or something like that, but every day they're in contact with the earth. They're watching the grass. Has the grass grown? Has there been rain? Every day they're really connected in a way that's very hard for urban people. And that's in part, in a way, commercialism has survived because it's kind of a hunter-gatherer in the city. You go out and you look in the shop window and say, oh, I want that. You know, that's like hunter-gathering, you know. And I'm not quite, that's why I say it's a difficult one. And I think what to do to bring the non-urban world back. This is an aside, but I remember as a kid, I had a dream when I used to run away from home because Brooklyn was too tough for me. And so I'd go into New York City and I'd get on the subway and get off someplace, and I'd get really lost, and the cops had to pick me up a few times. But one night I went to sleep on a bench around the public library on Fifth Avenue, and I dreamed that cattle came back into New York and were being driven down to Wall Street. And all the windows opened and they were playing Peruvian flute music. And that no one could get to the stock exchange because of the livestock. And that the livestock had once for the first time replaced the financial stock. And that all of New York now was filled with cattle that no one knew what to do with. But that's the dream, you know. Somehow, how do you bring that sense that the cow you eat had a watershed that it lived in, it had erosion, you know, that it may have caused or may have been stopped, and you know, right now that's why I work in Mexico and the United States with ranchers, and it's because ranchers are going through a big change. It's actually a moral change, an ethical change. It's an opening. Not all ranchers, but a good number of them, and they have decided that they will allow jaguars to live on their ranches, and that they will become part of the open space to protect jaguars. And so we bought this sanctuary for jaguars in Mexico, and now we're trying to get a corridor for the jaguars to come back, and most of that corridor is in ranches. And so what we've done at first is we've taught them to tell the difference between a cow killed by a jaguar and a cow killed by a mountain lion. And we said, okay, if you have pictures, and jaguars do a whole different thing. They jump on the back, they don't go for the throat, but it's pretty gory. But if you have pictures, we will pay you for each cow that a jaguar kills, as if you promise not to kill the jaguars. And in addition, we'll pay your vaqueros, your cowboys, to set up cameras that trigger. They have a little line of infrared, and anything that passes it they take a picture. And we will then figure out what the corridor of the jaguar is from Mexico into the United States, and we will pay you to run the cameras. So we've gotten the cowboys a little extra money. No one gets paid very much in Mexico, so we've gotten them to then participate in the conservation of the jaguar, which only 5 years ago they were hunting and poaching and trying to sell the skins. So again, there's that slight moral shift that has financial incentives, but also it's an idea that they loved. I mean, actually, they, in a way, respected the jaguar. It's the biggest cat. It was the strongest predator. I mean, these guys are carrying guns. They're into big cats. So you just change that sympathy and extend the heart out, and then you change. You can change the world that way. And you're basing it all on this beautiful kind of myth of the jaguar and the parrot that came from the Aztecs and came up from Mexico. And I'm also working actually with thick-billed parrots the same way to bring them back to the United States where they used to be. And it really helps to have that magic, that you have a jaguar and a parrot, and they're part of a very old tradition of the most beautiful bird and the strongest predator, and carry a kind of teaching of power about beauty and about power. And in short, be kind to yourself, try to extend your heart out, and try to see how magic can be used to save the earth.
So I'll just say, some people believe that human civilization has arrived at a bottleneck in which the carrying capacity of our biosphere is at its limits. Do you believe that we're at this point in time? And if so, why?
I'm first and foremost a maniacal naturalist in love with the planet. And the planet has been around for 3.8 billion, well, life has been around for 3.8 billion years, the planet even longer. And so when you ask a question about, is this the end of the earth or the end of the world, from the point of a maniacal naturalist, of course not. Some people use the phrase Gaia, not necessarily as a religious term, but as an expression that the earth takes care of itself in certain ways. So the real question about the end of the world, is it the end of the world for humans on this planet, not for the end of the world for the planet? The planet has gone through crises before. I mean, we lost all of our dinosaurs, or the little dinosaurs that remained turned into birds and lizards and stuff like that. And we've gone through other big crises in the Cambrian period about 500 million years ago. So if you step back and you take an Earth perspective rather than a human perspective, it can't be an 11th hour for the Earth. It can be an extinction crisis for the Earth. And it can be a harmony crisis for the Earth, because we now see that one species is taking over so much of the resources of the Earth that it's leaving very little for other creatures to live with it. And we don't know the consequences of that. It's like you have this huge web and you're starting to pick out little pieces. There's a thing in India called Indra's web, and it's like a gigantic, endless spider web. And at each point in the web, there's a jewel. And through that jewel, you can see every other part of the web. And it's kind of the way what we know about the Earth is, that you take any one species, any one plant, any one resource, and it's looking through that jewel. And we don't know what happens when you pluck that jewel out. I mean, we know it reverberates through the whole web, and the web may collapse in certain parts, it may not. So it's an 11th hour in the sense that humans have to change themselves in very ethical and moral and spiritual ways in order to stay here without a lot of pain, future pain and suffering. Humans will stay around, but it may not be fun to stay around if it causes more wars, more diseases, if the flu, avian flu is just one example of what may happen now that we've globalized. We're just mixing up all the viruses with all the bacteria. And ultimately, unfortunately, humans think they are the most powerful. And that's probably a little bit of the arrogance of the species. But if you take a 3.8 billion year perspective, it's those viruses and bacteria that seem to be most powerful because they've stayed around. They know how to change really rapidly and adapt themselves to an Earth that's been hit by a comet, to an Earth that's going through glaciers, to an Earth that's heating up like in the Eocene. And they find little ways to get through those bottlenecks and come out the other end, and then start life all over again and start making more things. And, so from the point of view of a maniacal naturalist, and I know it's not everybody's point of view, it's really a crisis of the human soul right now, about how are we going to live inside the Indra's net and, of course, take some things. We have to stay alive, but not take so much that, in effect, we're pulling the rug out from underneath us. And again, there might be a world in another 3,000 years with very few humans, but there might still be some humans. I mean, but what we would see in between there would be just one of the most painful sufferings and losses of lives. And it's not, and I think we've learned that we're not immune from it. America has this feeling like it's a gated community. And there are a lot of things that go through the gate. Hurricanes go through gates, among other things, and global climate change will go through a gate very easily. Viruses go through gates very easily. Even trade routes begin to collapse. And so the price of oil could double, triple, who knows what, in the next 20 years. That we are not, and that's what we're learning. I think that's what America's learning right now, is that they are, through trade, through dependence, we are really a very dependent animal. We like to think of ourselves as independent and out of the loop, and I am who I am. I'm great, and I don't need anybody else. But then you turn on the faucet and you get water, and you say, well, where does that water come from? Or even more so, you flush the toilet, and you don't think, who am I affecting by flushing the toilet? It's the very simple things that, when you live in a city, that disconnect you from nature. And one of the things to always have in mind and to bring forward and to make part of our educational system, and that would really change government and even would change the nature of how we thought about religion, would be to ask very simple questions. And the simple questions might be, when you turn on your faucet, where does the water come from? And who am I affecting by turning on my faucet? Or even more so, when I flush the toilet, where's the water going? And who am I affecting when I flush the toilet? And I don't just mean humans. So when you turn on a faucet in certain places, or an irrigator turns on the faucet to bring you food, they're taking water out of a stream that might have a salmon run in it. And so you're depleting that. You're taking the water from the salmon and you're using it for other reasons. And so then when the price of salmon goes up, or they turn salmon into salmon farms, which don't taste anywhere near as good and are causing pollution, it's in part connected to your turning that faucet. Or when you flush the toilet and you don't know where it goes, there are lots of nutrients in your sewage. And when it gets out finally, let's say, to the ocean, you might be causing algae to grow and changing a whole ecosystem, so that you're no longer making kelp beds, you're no longer having sea otters. And so those simple questions have been kind of ripped out of our education system. So, and they've been ripped out of the simple ways of asking, what are the sources of life? It used to be that, and America still romanticizes saying grace at the table for dinner. Well, you say grace because you're thanking not only the God you believe in, but also the earth for producing that food. But no one knows what earth produced their own food. They don't even know where that earth is, let alone if it's a silty clay loam, or it's a sandy soil, or if it's a soil that's been wrecked by fertilizers and herbicides, or if it's a soil that's actually a virgin, or a soil where the tilth, they call the word tilth, the fertility of the soil is organic and replaced by organic materials. But again, it's asking those simple questions. So when you're about to eat, you say, where did this food come from? Another really good question I've always asked is, what are the power spots in the place you live? Because that begins to get you into place. There are two things that can perhaps save the world. One would be the mastery of one's kindness to oneself and the big heart. And the other would be understanding your passion for place, for where you live, and really loving the place that you live in. So here we are right now. Out the window is Mount Tamalpais. Mount Tamalpais is an amazing mountain that many people before Euro-Americans came here understood was an amazing mountain. They didn't know why exactly, but they knew it contained power. Now we have long geology about it, how North America crashed into the Pacific Plate, and then North America overrode the Pacific Plate and created a mountain range, and that top of that mountain range actually comes from the bottom of the sea and has all these beautiful kind of soils that create unique plants on it. And so now we have another kind of story that we're telling. But they're just stories. I mean, ultimately, they're the story of the geologist, the story that was told about Abalone Someone and how she came out of the ocean and blessed the mountain because it had springs on it. And so one thing I always have felt is that many people should understand not only where their water comes from when they turn on the faucet and where the origins of that is, but the old respect for springs, because springs were really the source of life. I mean, if you go to any of the Christian countries, there's the Virgin of Guadalupe, there's the Mother Mary, always by a spring. Everybody understood that you came to the spring for healing waters. You came to the spring because that's where the plants grew herbs that couldn't grow in drier climates. And so another great way, simple understanding of their passion for place is to identify the springs near you and make sure they're protected. And once you do that, you're completely involved with environmental politics. I can tell you that I ran a utilities district for 10 years. And as soon as you try to protect the source of waters, you get involved with government agencies, with the EPA, with land developers, with zoning laws. So again, it's like you find something that you love, like a spring. And just dedicating yourself to it means that the whole world will open up to you. You begin to want to understand the springs in some other place, to learn something about how other people have dealt with springs. So that's essentially, in talking about Indra's net, that's one of the jewels, I think, are springs. The other thing that's happening now, very slowly on the planet, is that people used to take pilgrimages, and that was a way of confirming their spiritual strength and giving back to the earth by prayer, or giving back to, in Ethiopia, where I worked for a long time in the hunger camps, the only trees that existed were around each of the churches, because you could not cut trees inside the church grounds. And so after the drought, 16 years of drought, I mean, imagine what would happen in America with 16 years of drought. And after the 16 years of drought, that became the seed source for recovering the land. And so the spiritual and the love of nature were very tightly bound in Ethiopia. It's very tightly bound. And also because you save those trees as a seed source, that's where all the birds were still, that's where all the monkeys still lived. And so that became their kind of sanctuary from which they could move out of. And we don't have that sense anymore. I mean, we are beginning to develop it. I would say that every family that wants to go to Yellowstone or Yosemite or the Grand Canyon is the very early beginnings in a young country of a pilgrimage. And maybe 200 or 300 years from now, everyone will understand that that's a pilgrimage. They're going to the power spots of North America. They're going to show their children the beauty of our natural heritage, of the nation's heritage. And we will start seeing it that way because it has all the stuff of pilgrimage. Anybody can go. You can come by Learjet or you can hitchhike. I mean, it doesn't matter how you get there. You can climb the highest mountain or you can just stay in the valley, and enjoy yourself. And so America's young that way. And we really owe it to the Native Americans to help us point out which are those spots that should be looked at. Now they're tourist spots, but maybe in 100 or 200 years they'll be sacred spots. And we should understand how young a country we are and, maybe speed that process up a bit. It would help.
Speaking of that helping, and back to the bottleneck, because you said really it's not about the planet so much as it's about human survivability. What do you believe where are we headed if we don't change, if we're going as business as usual? What's going to happen to humanity? How many people are we going to lose?
Well, we don't know that. I'm not a prophet, and I'm not going to sit here as a prophet. You know, I don't know I can hardly figure out what's going to happen next year, you know, let alone what's going to happen 100 years from now. And there's a dance going on, two melodies going around. One, people believe in the techno melody, that we'll somehow come across techno miracles that will solve all these issues. And then there's the other people who are, I would say that they're the environmental, in generally the environmental, the sustainability movement, that understand that no matter what the technology is, technology can be used both ways. Can be used to relieve pain or to bring in more pain, and that we should basically look at the sources of life: water, earth, air, energy, and spirit really is the other source. So, and look at those most carefully. So if I was going to say there's a bottleneck right now, I don't think you should separate things out. I would be talking against myself. For instance, if you think about nuclear power, in order to cool a nuclear power reactor, you need 3 times as much water per kilowatt as you do with diesel or coal. So when we're producing energy, you don't think just about energy. You think about this kind of odd marriage between energy and water. And I think that that is the first thing that has to change. It has to surely change in the World Bank. I mean, the World Bank has a water sector, it has an energy sector, it has a food sector. The UN works that way too. And all these things are incredibly combined. I just came back from a conference that turned out to be mostly UN people. I mean, kind of high-level UN people. And our table, which consisted of a wonderful man from Lebanon and a woman from China, made the suggestion that they create a pipe from northern Iraq or Saudi Arabia all the way to the Gaza Strip, and that pipe would take natural gas to the Gaza Strip and use it to desalinate water, because the Gaza Strip is now not only has no water, but the ocean is coming in and polluting the aquifers with salt water. The Palestinians would then be able to sell the extra gas to Europe through a offshore oil facility, or to sell it to Israel or Jordan. And they would also be able, if they had extra water, use it for irrigation or sell it to Israel, you know, right there. So the idea there was we're connecting water, energy, food, and most of all, this pipeline would be protected by an army made of Iraqis, Saudis, Jordanians, Palestinians, and Israelis, so that they would learn how to create security together and create the peace that's been needed there for years. And they all would have something that they wanted in common, which is the water and the energy. And so that's not the way the World Bank thinks. And it would also mean that you wouldn't think, oh, this is the private sector, this is the public sector. The public sector would be the UN, which would run the army. The private sector might be a BP oil in Iraq or Saudi Arabia. The World Bank might fund the desalinization plant, make it a multilateral effort. But I'm giving you this very concrete idea to show you where the bottleneck is. The bottleneck is conceptual. People think that if you have fewer children, it's automatically a good thing for the planet. But people forget that there's no insurance policy in Kenya. And so when people get old, they need their children to take care of them. If you only have 1 or 2 children, and one of them gets killed in a war, or another dies of AIDS, then you're left as an old person without insurance. And so the Africans they're not just thinking, well, I should have less children to save the planet. They're thinking, like, how do I have this new world in which, for instance, the health sector might say, okay, we'll provide you with old age insurance if you have only 1 or 2 children. Again, you're breaking the boxes. And the boxes are horrible. I mean, the boxes are killing the world right now. You know, I just went to a place where I saw the UN talking about absolute poverty, and this is absolute poverty. I mean, people earning $1 a day max, no disposable income, a lot of it not even monetized. And they would not think about the environment. They would think, oh no, we're going to relieve poverty. And I was there as the brat, right? I'm saying, hold it. People who live in that level are totally only involved in the environment, trying to get their food, trying to get their water, and let's try to think of how you can help them save the environment while they're on the edge of starvation. But again, the boxes. And I think that's really it's an odd one. I know it's not one of the bottlenecks that people usually talk about. It's not the population bottleneck or the resource bottleneck. I think it's a distorted mind bottleneck. And I think that it happens in USAID. It happens in the Department for International Development. It happens all over the planet that people can't use the interliving, I would call it, how things interlive with each other.
What solutions give you the most hope that you've run across? And I know that you've already talked about some.
Well, I mean, again, we have many harmonies on the planet. And you have to find the harmony. You have to find out if you like to play jazz, or if you like to do heavy metal, or if you like to sing folk songs, for that matter. And so when you find what you love and you want to work on those, and you persist, and you're disciplined about your persistence, then that can lead to solutions. Sometimes the world overwhelms you. I mean, I can't even talk about my times in the hunger camps in Ethiopia, waiting for an airplane with people starving. But sometimes the world will overwhelm you, and you just have to accept that. But in general, for instance, business is going through, like ranchers, are all going through a moral. What the Earth Care movement has done is to invite people to change their moral persuasion. And so when that was offered to the business community, some said, oh, they're a bunch of communists, or they're a bunch of earth first, they just want to wreck capitalism. But other people said, oh no, we should be caring for the earth, and let's look at it. So IKEA, for instance, which is a furniture company, went out and they went over everything. They looked at the wood preservatives in their wood and decided those weren't right. They looked at the stain resistors in their fabrics and decided that wasn't right. They looked at every aspect of what they were doing, and they started to change it. And they have changed it. They're pretty amazing that way. And so even on the corporate level or the business level, there are indications of change that should be encouraged. In other words, people shouldn't just say corporate bad, shareholders, bunch of idiots. They should actually look, and again, it's a passion for place. In this kind of weird way, it's a commercial place. It's a network place, because like IKEA is all over the place. But you can look at that. And for instance, when baby teething rings that all of mothers used to get have a plastic softener in it so that the baby can actually bend it and that was made with phthalates, which is a kind of synthetic molecule that leaks estrogens into the body. And stuff from Puerto Rico, I mean, a lot of studies with non-animals was showing that was really changing the metabolism of infants who were very vulnerable because their bodies were so small and their metabolism hadn't really set up. And in 1998, without Bush administration, without the EPA, without anybody, the whole group of toy makers that made teething rings said no more phthalates. So what you're finding is that government is not, what's unfortunate perhaps is that the United States is now no longer a leader in anything to do with caring for one's body or for caring for the earth. I mean, we're off the map. Germany is a very good country looking at that. They're looking at eco-taxation, and Sweden is looking at that stuff carefully. And we all feel bad, I think, or I feel bad as a patriotic American, that our country is just such a loser when it comes to that. I mean, you know. So oddly, other things are taking for saying, okay, we're accepting that our federal government's a loser. So let's go find another place where we can be effective and not worry. Let them be losers, you know, let them be the losers they are. That's what they are. And so you find the states. Some states are passing global warming laws, you know. You find businesses beginning to say, well, if the government's not going to do it, we still have a kind of ethical responsibility to look at this. I mean, not ExxonMobil, which is, they're horrible that way, but groups like BP, parts of Shell Oil are looking. And so it's a different world where we were so used to the government being the leader that now we have to look to other places to be effective. I'd say the saddest part in America right now is that the public school education is so poor on earth care and thinking about it. I know hardly any schools where people ask the kids, where does your water come from? I was talking to some 7-year-old who said, oh, well, it goes down the sink and then it comes back up, you know, and it just keeps on coming around like that with no idea where water came from. And I was talking to one other, this is an adult, he was in his 40s, and I asked him what happened when he flushed the toilet. He said, oh, that's my sense of faith. I just flush the toilet, it goes somewhere. So, I mean, people are not, what America's really losing out on is its educational sense of earth care. Let me tell one more story. I used to take kids from Oakland, from the ghettos in Oakland, out to look at tide pools because they had never seen tide pools and they didn't even know what tide pools were. But I was walking through the Green Gulch Zen Gardens to get down to the beach, and I casually pulled out a carrot. And this kid says to me, wow, man, that's a cool carrot. That's a Bugs Bunny carrot. And I said to him, what do you mean? He says, well, look, man, it got a green end on it. And he had never seen a carrot with a green end in his whole life. They'd all come in plastic bags. And for him to understand that carrots came out of the earth and had a green end was much more important than tide pools. And so I spent the rest of the day going around saying, look, this is where tomatoes grow, you know, this is how lettuce grows. And they were just, you know, like, this is revelation that things came out of the earth and didn't look exactly, that broccoli actually had a stalk, you know. So that's how distant a lot of America is becoming from its own sense of the earth. And that's why, I'm a big pusher for new education on that.
Can we go back to your
Sure.
Thought on religion and the separate of nature and this people just being so far away from, in our culture being so far away from understanding where carrots come from in water and what's the role and what has religion done to, and I know that evangelicals have a big argument right now about creation care and should you care for the creator creation and things like that. Do you have thoughts on where religion is? Because it seems like business is definitely, in some cases, stepping in.
In some cases.
In some cases.
Not in the petrochemical industry.
But in religion, and we can talk about the petrochemical industry if you'd like to.
I don't think organized religion has caught on yet. I think that the earth care environmental movement is dragging them into it. And I think it's good. I think that there is a discussion among evangelicals about what's more important, the creator or the creation. I don't know how to me, the creator is the creation, so it's a little hard for me to understand not being an evangelical Christian. I think that the dialogue is beginning is an indication that things have changed. There is a group called Evangelicals for the Endangered Species Act that has formed that goes around and says, God created all these creatures. It is utter arrogance to send a creature to extinction that God has put on the earth. And so inside their own theology or way of looking at the world, it's great that the dialogue is taking. The question, of course, is time. How you can talk about this forever, and that doesn't help us save species. And so there will need to be other things outside of the religious, organized religion. I mean, everybody has a religion. I mean, everybody is somehow connected to ethics and morality and spirit. Some are just more explicit about it. And religion means religare. In Latin, it means to tie things together again and again. And so it's like Indra's net. It ties things together. It brings things together. And that's why people love to be part of a religious community. It's because things get tied together. I've always thought that it'll be great the day where you don't have to legislate against littering. It'll just be part of the taboo. It'll be a religious taboo. You don't throw a can out. And so you don't have to go even teach it anymore. It just becomes part of your upbringing. And certain things are better and have been. For instance, kosher meat has always been slaughtered in a particular way. And that is part of religious taboo. They don't think of it as an environmental ethic, but it's actually, for both Muslims and for Jews, all the Semitic peoples, that's a better way to actually deal with meat. That meat tends to be better meat, the kosher meat. So eventually, these things take time. Humans are real slow on this whole thing. Those things become part of your daily life. And that would be my hope that, certain organized religions begin to do that. Right now, it's almost all of Europe doesn't belong to an organized religion. And they do it as human secularists. They're humanists, and that's how they talk about it. These are good ethics. And in the United States, it must be part of an organized religion. We're very much into small churches and synagogues, and so those are just two different cultural ways, and that may be a bottleneck, actually, that there are so many diverse ways to do it. How do you get all of that moving when you have so many different ways of doing it, even if all the ways essentially could go in the same way?
That was wonderful. We really covered almost everything, unless there's something you want to say. I have that final question, which is sort of a time capsule question, but if you want, do you want to discuss anything?
I forgot one thing on your religious stuff.
Okay.
The word worship comes from worth and shape. Those is where those two words from. And so when people say they worship, they're giving worth and shape to something. So when you worship the sources of life, earth, air, fire, water, spirit, it's not that you have to be a particular religion. You can incorporate giving worth and shape to those things that are the sources of life without throwing out your religion. I mean, in the 1960s, people thought, well, if I gave worth and shape to earth, air, fire, water, that you were becoming a pagan, and that was anti-Christian or anti-Jewish or anti-Muslim. But I think now people understand the broader understanding that giving worth and shape to those elements or those sources of life doesn't mean you have to give up what you have. In other words, the big heart now should be inclusive rather than exclusive, is the way to do it. And I think that the more inclusive religion becomes of the earth, the stronger it'll be, and actually the more authority it will claim. And if it keeps on being exclusive, it actually will just create more tension and more anxiousness. So I just wanted to say that.
If you were to put this moment into a time capsule for future generations at this point in time, what are your hopes and dreams for the future? And what would you say to them, given what you know about the state of the world?
I'm getting to be an old man, so I get to say a lot of things that I wouldn't be able to say when I was young. I would say that it's important when you're in your late teens to through your 20s to really find out what you love. I mean, to kind of not do it just because you want to go to business school or you want to become a dentist or you want to drop out and become a rock musician, but a little bit maybe like Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam or something like that. Decide what your or like Leonardo DiCaprio, decide what your real loves are and start working on them parallel, not again in conflict with what you're doing to earn your living or, and you can love more than one thing, obviously. I mean, you know, and once you have that, and you focus on that, then you have to discipline it because the world is going to do everything to try to destroy that kind of earth care love. It's just not the right time of history, and that's the hard part. I mean, I sometimes grieve, really. A lot of people say, oh, I wish you could teach my kids so that they would go out in nature and, you know, they would learn so much by loving nature. And I have to say to them that it's a dangerous occupation because you see so many things go extinct. You see so many landscapes disappear. It's not for the weak of heart. I mean, you have to become kind of a biogladiator, you know, in the world right now because things are happening so fast. And you're not going to get total success. And a lot of people try one thing, it doesn't work, and they give up. And that's why you have to have that commitment outside of success. Success is what everyone promotes, but you're going to have some partial successes. You're going to have some successes that are bigger than you ever thought. When I was 29, I became an elected official in a small town in California, and an oil spill occurred in California. And out of that, the town decided it was going to clean up all of its water. It just got the bug, you know. And so because I was a biologist, they figured, well, he loves birds as much as he does people or water. We'll elect him because then he won't get into politics. Of course, you have to get into politics. But we built the first or second total recycling sewage system in 1973 in California. And it only used algae and bacteria to process the sewage. And at that time, we were going to recycle the water for a series of ranchers. And they were going to use it to grow grazing lands. But it turned out that we didn't know anything. So we built these big irrigation systems that the cows knocked over all the time and the water spilled out. And soon we had a beautiful marsh. And now everyone, because I like birds, everyone says, oh yeah, well in his political legacy, he built this beautiful wetland, which actually was just, I didn't really build it. It was because the cows built it. They knocked over all the irrigation systems. But now it's considered one of the hot spots for birding in California after, 30 years or something like that. And it's still going and people, you know, and everything like that. So, but the commitment came on seeing San Francisco Bay or the outside of the bay covered in asphalt in the water. A lot of parents and even kids have asked me to take them out into the wilds and teach them nature and learn to love nature. And I've always had to be a little careful about that because the world is changing so fast that if I take them out, they're going to see the harm done to the earth. And in fact, and see as they grow up, some species actually go extinct. And so to learn nature now is not to be weak at heart. You have to really become a biogladiator. And as a biogladiator, be able to go through successes and failures and absorb the pain of the earth without letting the pain of the earth kill you.